Welcome to Just Another Solar Podcast. I'm Luke Beatty and co-host is here, Carl Jensen. G'day, Carl.
Hey, Luke. Thanks for setting up and doing all the hard work and the Zoom links and all of that stuff.
Well, that's all right. I thought you were going to be in Sydney for your Christmas party, but apparently you had different plans. The plans were squashed.
Yeah, COVID case at the kids' school equals we go nowhere. So that was a bit of a bummer, but I guess those of us that travel around all over the place are running into that particular problem regularly. You're lucky over in WA, you don't have any cases, but we're still tracking at 1,200 plus a day in Vic.
Needless to say, a lot's happened in the industry since the last podcast with Glenn Morris. So we spoke about the AS5033. There's been a few issues with that, a bit of a shit show in some states like New South Wales. So we're going to go into that. We also have the Invertergeddon. So come the 18th of December, it's looking like that a lot of the inverters aren't going to be recertified by that point. Today, we've brought on a special guest who is a business owner. He currently has 4 businesses, but has helped open at least another 4 businesses, has been an installer, is very much involved in sales and all operations. So today we've got Bryn Folletta. Welcome, Bryn.
Hey guys, how you going?
Yeah, good, mate. Welcome aboard.
Bryn, give us a quick rundown on your history in the industry for us.
Yeah, okay. So I sort of started the industry back in 2008, and then I was just installing, running around as a contractor, installing for many companies, many that have gone under and things like that. Learned a lot how different solar businesses were operating. Then got to the point after about, I think it came about 2014, I felt like I wanted to go into retail because I was just actually at a moment where I was installing a inverter for a customer and they came outside and you know, I won't tell you what brand inverter it was, but they said, oh, this is the best inverter, isn't it? And, you know, I'm like, holding on to this inverter and I'm like, I can't do this anymore because I knew there was a lot better quality out there. And I'd started doing a lot with Feronius and SolarGain and, you know, learning on connecting them to the internet and how important monitoring was right back then with the IG series. It was even before 2014. I think that was about 2012. Mainly doing a lot of work in Canberra at that time as well. So put it to the guys at SolarGain and then you ended up sort of opening the first store back in 2014 in Wangaratta up in country Victoria. Slogged away at that and built a pretty good business model that turned out to become a dealership. And we just kept on building it from there. And I think we've opened nearly I've done about 8 or 9 stores since then, and a few of the other guys have done about 2 or 3 as well. So it's given us a lot more sort of reach right around the country of having those when Melbourne companies and things like that were trying to do installations like, you know, far away, you know, call it 2 hours plus. As soon as they got a drama, it's impossible to get to them, give yourself a bad name, can't get out there for 6 weeks, all those sorts of problems. It alleviated all that. And also, you know, just having good guys direct employed as well. So you've got control of them as well to be able to get out there and service that customer. And I've really seen a massive opportunity back in 2014 where the industry was really sort of thriving. There was a good opportunity there to be able to jump on the service side and really push service and build a good name that way. You know, where some of those earlier stores, some of their lead generations is nearly 70% organic. So it's just ludicrous numbers up in the country. And that's just from, you know, a customer calling up, oh, I'm not connected to the internet, bang, out there within, you know, 4 hours, get it connected for them. You got someone, you know, close there, worst case, you know, within the week. So, you know, just that sort of turnaround quick service, which I'm pretty sure every guy's had heaps of dramas, even with the high-end inverters dropping off the internet or customers changing their modems and all those sorts of issues. You know, they just think it's us straight away. But, yeah, if you've got the resources and you can get out there and fix things like that, yeah, it goes a long way.
So, Bryn, on that note, I heard a rumour that you managed to do 100,000 Ks in a year. Is that true?
Yeah. I've got a 2016 model Hilux there that that I moved on recently, and that was at 350,000 Ks it had done in 2019.
So servicing customers has a significant cost in time and Ks. That's an amazing effort. It's a
It's
lot of
huge, isn't
driving.
it?
I suppose it's
And
harder being the local guy in regional areas as well, because if you're the local guy in the suburbs in a city, then you're servicing a certain region. You may go within the city itself, but being a regional guy in, say, Wangaratta or somewhere similar, you've got a lot further to go.
yeah, as far as your serviceability is normally, about 150 Ks. And you don't really want to go any bigger than that from my experience.
So how do you maintain the quality of your installs then? You've got in-house guys doing the installs, but how do you maintain that quality when there's so much distance? It's not like you can audit a lot of the jobs.
So look, I've got guys that audit in the stores. I do a lot of training. I use platforms that I've got photos of before and after on every single job, which is pretty much criteria now, but I've been doing that for many, many years. Yeah, that's the criteria these days, claiming STCs and how they're trying to clamp down on that. I've always had processes in place just of my own, just to maintain that so I can see what's going on there. One other thing I've always had is every system has to be connected to the internet. Otherwise, they have to do a report form on how it's operating and what it's doing. And then that gets checked as well. So before the customer gets paperwork or gets lodged, that gets checked. So you can see how those individual strings are performing and make sure that it all looks like it's working right. Plus from photos, and plus we do auditing as well. So I've I've got an installation managers in every store. So they run around looking after. I've pretty much built those guys into what I used to do. And as I've grown, I've developed to make sure I've got installation managers that are running around doing my job, and then I can look after them, and that's how we've sort of grown it that way.
So the AS5033 has rolled, the new version, and it was quite interesting that we had Glenn Morris on 2 weeks ago, and we're talking about how the older version and your version would run concurrently for 6 months. Now, New South Wales turned around and said, no, this has been implemented immediately. Now, the interesting thing is if you had installed on the Friday when the standards were published, they weren't accessible online for a couple of days at least. And then you need the installers to have a chance to read it, to work out the interpretation. I think Glenn Morris was saying, it takes at least 6 months and it's an ongoing process to interpret what the standard actually says. So it was almost like the guys in New South Wales had studied for a semester, turned up for the day of the test, been handed a different textbook and had to go and do a test according to that. So an example of that is that we spoke about the requirement for labels on the disconnection points. I know for a fact that none of the wholesalers or label companies I know of even had those labels. You can't refer to the draft standard. Not everything was carried across. And there was no communication from the regulator that this was going to be implemented immediately. If that had been the case, would have been at least trying to get across what the changes were going to be much quicker. I think they've made a mistake in New South Wales in trying to implement it immediately before any interpretation can be brought there without any communication to industry. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's definitely made it a bit tough. So there was a fair bit of scrambling going on there because we've got active jobs at the moment in New South Wales and a few carrying over commercial jobs that have gone across, started before that date and have finished after that date. With those jobs, like I had one guy come to me the other day and he's like, oh, hey, I've heard we can get rid of DC isolators. So, should I not put them in today? And I'm like, well, hold up. I said, no, not at all. This was in Victoria. This fella said it to me. I said, no, give me time. Need to obviously go away, work it all out and work out best practice. I'll go do a few installs. I'm doing one on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm on the tools with the boys, and that's one of the main reasons I'm doing that is just to go work out exactly how I can implement this new standard. As far as the New South Wales ones, you can still put in a DC isolator. It's not as if like they're getting rid of it completely. So all our New South Wales jobs have been done with DC isolators, and then the labelling's probably the most concerning thing for me at the moment of just getting that all out there before they're commissioned. So I've got a few outstanding New South Wales jobs of current that I've got that aren't signed off, because getting the map drawn up of exactly where and how we're going to do that with the laminate, that needs to be done, and labelling. And as far as I can read through and the amount of work I've done on it, if you're doing it to the old standard, I think you only got labelling and the DC map of where the cables run. I think that's about, would I be right in saying that?
Well, some of the other ones that have come up, so for New South Wales first, if we're talking about immediate implementation of the new standard, a couple of the other ones that came across my desk is the cable requirements. So there's some changes there, and there's question marks on whether some of the DC cable we've been using is still going to be compliant to that. And the other interesting one was there's a requirement for drainage in the conduit. So I spoke to Glenn Morris about this yesterday, and he said, the standard breathers or something similar we've been using on DC isolators aren't sufficient. So in the new standard, it talks about how you have the conduit come down and you typically put a gland there to make it watertight. It's actually removing that gland so the water can leak out that way. There's a diagram in the standards, apparently. I haven't seen it. Glenn was saying that the course he ran, the crash course on AS5033, was incredibly popular. So he's going to run one again, I think 22nd, 23rd of December. We're seeing a lot of the conversations online talking about it. So talking about the 1,000-volt rule, where one of the smart cookies or the astute guys online identified that clashes with AS4771, which doesn't allow you to go over 600 volts. This was raised as an issue, and then they went to ESV for clarification, and they said, well, because there's a discrepancy between them, we have to go to the AS4777 at the 600 volts as the lowest one until either the standard changes or the regulators, who in this case it's them, make a different call. To get the standards changed, we're not talking months, we're talking years.
Yeah,
which is a real shame. Obviously, that's been an oversight, and the people that are involved in these standards have missed that particular oversight. In terms of the 600-volt requirement on a resi job, I don't know that it's a huge deal. I would have liked to have gone higher on my own system, which is going in on Monday. But as it is, I can string it for sub 600 volts, and my Froniuses are more than happy to deal with that. But it certainly will add to the efficiency of systems when we can start doing a 6.6 kilowatt system with a single string. That'll be fantastic for us, save cable and isolators and multiple points of failure.
It's just a shame, because it was clear that they were willing to go to the 1,000 volts, and the standards committee, including Glenn, they all pushed for it and got the 1,000 volts. And just because there's a clash with the AS4777, unfortunately, unless a regulator says otherwise, it's 600 volts.
Bummer. Look, I think that the whole laminated map of the cables and the way the strings are configured, that's always been in the standard. It's just been realistically clarified for what needs to be done. I remember when, Bryn, back in 2008, the interpretation of the standard back then was that you needed something along those lines. And indeed, my first install 12 years ago at the house in Perth, I had a laminated image of the house with the panels and the way the strings were laid out, put it all together, and it lived in the board with how the system was laid out. And that was 12 years ago. So I think that is a good thing. And it's really not that difficult to do. In terms of the rooftop isolators, I've had a couple of customers say to me, hey, look, by the time we put a set of MC4s there and wire them off, they cost $5, and you still need a weather shield, and then you need a different label. By the time you do all of that stuff, you might as well put a DC isolator there anyway. So it doesn't look like we've effectively gotten rid of it. We all know that it's a point of failure, but the solution is not necessarily any better than the problem.
Yeah, true. And obviously things will develop as well, as we interpret it, what we come up with. It could be those gaskets in many of those DC isolators, they perish and they end up leaking water and whatnot. And obviously the cover gives it a little bit more protection. But until you sort of start getting down to 5 to 7 years old, you don't really sort of see that. But then that also comes back to the maintenance of our own systems too, when, you should really be doing maintenance on your own systems. I believe every 3 to 5 years. Most people have changed their internet, reconnecting that, going out, just servicing it, making sure it's all right, finding the issues before they arise. It's super important for a service point of view. A lot of our customers are more than happy to have us come out and do that service and just make sure it's all right. I've heard a few other companies from customers saying, I've got to get it serviced every year, otherwise I void warranty. And I think that's definitely not good business practice, and I don't believe it should have to be done more than every 5 years, really. You normally pick up any issues, and in my experience of what I've done and what I've been back to and seen, like 5 years, you're well capturing perishing of conduits and things like that, where you've got those issues with systems out there when they bought out having to cover your isolator. Then all of a sudden we had isolators really exposed, and then we've got a fair few systems out there who are probably that era where they've got big corrie loops coming in from the bottom of them. And if that corrie gets eaten by birds or rodents, which I've seen a fair bit, or, even perished by the sun if it wasn't that higher quality UV rated, been back to jobs where I've seen that starting to perish. And then all of a sudden you've got a straw straight from there, straight into the inverter. And then it's going to fill that inverter up as well. So that's another issue, that even, a lot of the good guys have probably got installations out there that could have that potential happening. And then you fill a Fronius, for example, up with water, and you've done a back entry, or even a bottom entry, however you've entered that. It's not Fronius's fault at all, but tracking down the manufacturer of that conduit to try and go them for warranty, that retailer is going to be up for a new inverter. So that's why it's super important that they get out there and just make sure that those conduits aren't perishing. And if they are, fix them up.
And this is the issue with companies, that their margin is just the labour cost of the install and maybe a fraction on the gear. The ones that are going really skinny and they're not actually loading in anything to account for so many jobs you're going to have to go back to off your own bat. It's not always the manufacturer's fault. So if you're not loading that into your margin build, that's where it becomes an issue for the customer.
No, exactly right. And then got that argument of, whose fault it is, what's going on. And then, you might be starting to argue with the suppliers, the manufacturers, when it's not even their fault. I've seen a lot of it, our orphan customers, as I call them, they come in, they've gone with another company, they didn't do any research. I'm pretty good to those ones that are pre-2012 because there wasn't that much information. But anyone that's been done the last 5 years, it's like, really, there is so much information on the internet about buyers beware. Doesn't take much at all to work it out. So it's, all you've got to do is search up a company's ABN number. If they've been in business 5 years, be real wary. Well, why have you only been in 5 years? You just ask all those questions. And, then they get upset. I've even had sort of competitors in Queensland that have got real new companies, and they've turned around to one of our guys and said, oh, well, it's all right, you'll get warranty claim through the manufacturer. I'm still selling you Fronius and Q-Cells, they're still here. But at the end of the day, it's a retailer that holds that warranty claim.
Look, the Australian consumer law thing is a whole podcast in itself. There's still a lot of people around the country that don't understand their responsibilities. I remember there was one on the Cutters thread we typed about the terms and conditions that an operator needs to supply to the customer. Someone piped in and said, it doesn't need to be a 4-page document, where in reality, those terms and conditions are there to protect both the retailer and the customer. At the end of the day, we can't have anything that's against Australian consumer law. So if we say, that responsibility is borne by somebody else when it's not, there's fines involved. And those terms and conditions really are important. And the bigger companies that are out there have developed those terms and conditions over many years, just so the customer knows what their responsibilities are and what rights they have. And all of that's in black and white. And fortunately in Victoria with Solar Victoria, if we didn't have a compliant set of terms and conditions, then you didn't get a Guernsey. But we're still seeing in other states, New South Wales and Queensland in particular, where there are small operators that just don't have that stuff.
Yeah, I heard of guys in Queensland, still going out to customers and doing like a contract sign off on carbon copy prints.
So I just want to move it along to what could end up being one of the biggest issues we've seen. The new inverter standard rolls on the 18th of December, and there's a whole host of inverters across the market that haven't yet got their compliance to that. So the CEC memo that went around said the new inverter standard is due to commence on the 18th of December. On the 22nd of November 2021, the plans of manufacturers whose inverters had integrated DC isolators were thrown into disarray when a committee of the electrical safety regulators, known as the Electrical Equipment Safety System Standing Committee of Officials Equipment Working Group, it's a mouthful, EESSCOEWG, published 2 bulletins which outline requirements for the certification of DC isolators, so basically about the inbuilt DC isolators, and they brought in a requirement saying that integrated DC isolators need to comply with AS 60947-3, which I've never heard of. But the point is this, that there's currently no labs that they know of that can certify to that standard. I've been doing some digging around some insiders and people from inverter manufacturers and testing facilities about this thing. And I can tell you that some of the inverters have made the listing. So Fronius, I think Goodway, Solus, some other ones, and some of the manufacturers have patchy models. So you check the CEC site, some of them are 2023, 2024, but there's a whole heap of them that say 18th of December. And if they don't get that certification beyond there, you can't install them, you can't claim STCs and so forth. So my understanding is this, that it's going to take some time, first of all, for the labs to be certified to test to that standard, and then it needs to go through the admin machine. It's quite possible that certificates won't be released till Jan, and potentially we're looking at Feb, March or something else for those who don't get across the line before the 18th of December.
Yeah, look, Luke, I spoke to Dougal on Friday from Fronius, and they're getting heaps of inquiries for people saying, hey, I'm going to need 500 inverters, 400 inverters, 200 inverters for this period where my other manufacturer isn't certified. We will see some shortages, i.e. Where people have been using brands that aren't on the list yet, potentially won't get there. I don't think that there's anything wrong with people, installers, going on holidays from the 18th of December and to have a couple of weeks with their families, probably neither here nor there. But once we get into this scenario where it's a couple of months, then clearly there will likely be a shortage even of the models that are certified in particular. So Goodway's a very popular inverter. At the end of the day, they're on the list. But if I was using something else and it's not on the list, I'll go buy a Goodway or I'll go buy a Fronius, and those stocks will be used up a lot more quickly. So we might see some issues.
This is going to cause an enormous issue. The point is that the new AS4777, I think it was 2 years ago where they spoke about the new requirements and the manufacturers worked towards that. And it was only when this EESS working group got together in November, so less than a month from when the new standards rolled, and brought in what was an impossible task to get these inverters approved according to that standard. It was a terrible decision. It lacked foresight. If it was one that was brought in or was announced 6 months ago, 12 months ago, this will be the requirement to meet that standard to be tested within the inverter, then that'd be all good and well. We're talking less than a month before it rolls. So manufacturers don't have a chance to meet that new compliance. But once again, we've got regulation, which is causing havoc in the industry. If it takes till Feb or March, good businesses are going to fail because there's going to be a limited pot of available stock. They might be selling what are compliant to AS4777, and it's on a technicality that the regulators are about to cut the knees out from under the industry.
Yeah, look, Luke, like you, we've been in the industry together for over 10 years. And we've always said the industry really does reward those that are well prepared, well organised, that are using quality gear.
I think the point in this case is, though, it's not just those guys who are affected. There's some good compliant inverters that on a technicality aren't going to be listed before the 18th of December. This has got the potential to have a seriously big impact on the industry. Companies will fail. If we're talking March for these products, not enough stock to go around, compliant products that aren't going to be certified because it's impossible, then I echo the calls of the CEC and I say that working group, the EESS, needs to backtrack on that, and they need to recognise the testing that was done prior to them moving the goalposts. If they decide to dig their heels in, it's going to be a shit show.
Yeah, look, I think the DCPV2 requirement to test it in the inverter is actually unrealistic, simply because it's not like you can feed the amount of power through that DC isolator and obviously through the inverter. You physically can't put 4 times the inverter's short circuit current rating through the isolator. If you're feeding it through the inverter, it won't do it. It's not capable. So in testing it in the inverter to meet that standard, we've actually had to take the thing apart and feed the isolator separately than through the inverter itself. In which case, what are we doing? That seems entirely nuts. Let's disconnect the terminals from the DC isolator that's built into the inverter. Test it while it's in the chassis. I just can't see how that's any different to testing it in a separate isolator enclosure chassis. What difference could it possibly make?
Because one other get around or work around that guys are talking about online was that if the inverter's compliant to the AS4777 new standards and the inbuilt DC isolator hasn't been approved and it's not ERAC approved, then they can put an external DC ISO. But under the new AS4777, if you have an inbuilt DC isolator, it needs to be level 3. It needs to be PV2.
Yeah,
bugger.
Which is a backward step because, as Glenn said last week, the risk assessment is DC isolators on the roof versus DC isolators at the inverter. The ones at the inverter are the ones that are likely to burn the house down. The little fire on top of the roof's neither here nor there because it's on the other side of a tin sheet, unlikely to set the house on fire, but one parked next to an inverter. And of course, that used to be my pet hate with people installing DC isolators underneath the inverters, because when they caught fire, they set fire to the inverter as well. Whereas at least if they were parked off to the sides, when they burnt, the inverter didn't burn as well.
True. So, Bryn, we've heard of the Flying Doctors, and now we're talking about the Flying Solar Men. You're currently in the process of buying a plane.
Yeah, mate. No, it's just getting built. It'll be finished towards the end of next year. With what Carl was saying before about how many Ks I do, that is definitely going to cut that time down massively and help me service pretty much everything that I've created a lot better. Cutting that time frame down from some of my travels, in the car could be 6.5 hours from one side of Victoria to the other. I can cut that down to like an hour and 20 minutes.
So you're going to get the company logo across it?
Yeah. It's a pretty quick plane though, so you have to have a pretty sharp eye to be able to see it. But yeah. Should we stick it up?
That's all you need. That's all you need to claim it as a tax deduction, isn't it, Bryn? Just like the shirt you're wearing. We've got the company logo on it. We put the company logo on the plane. We can claim it as a tax deduction. It'll be all fine.
Oh, look, it's mainly about advertising, Carl. I don't want to make sure that any of those near misses that I have, they remember the name.
All right, Bryn. Well, thanks for coming on the program today, mate.
Thanks for having me on the show, boys.
Wish you all the best for the rest of the year and post 18th of December, and hope you have a good break over Christmas too.
Yeah, we'll see. So, no worries at all. Cheers.
Look forward to going roller skating with the kids again, Bryn.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
Awesome,
Thanks, mate. And
thanks,
just
guys.
for thank you, mate. And anyone who's found it useful, please share it around. Obviously, it's geared towards installers and people involved in the solar industry, top to bottom. So share it with anyone who might find it useful and click the follow button. Thanks for listening.